Imagine waking up to a world where a loved one, a neighbor, or even a stranger simply vanishes without a trace. This was the reality for the small town of Brooksville when Ryan Waller, a seemingly ordinary man, disappeared without a single clue left behind. But the deeper we look, the more unsettling truths we uncover. Imagine waking up one morning to find that someone you know is simply gone. No note, no warning, no sign of where they went or why. It's a feeling that seems impossible to fathom until it happens right in front of you. This was the reality for the small town of Brooksville, a town that prided itself on being peaceful, where everyone knew each other and nothing ever seemed out of the ordinary. But in the summer of 2018, everything changed. Ryan Waller, a 34-year-old man who was known by everyone, simply disappeared. Ryan was like so many others, quiet, kind-hearted, and living an everyday life. He wasn't a criminal. He didn't have enemies. He wasn't someone who would just vanish. Yet, on one warm evening, Ryan left work early, telling his wife, Sarah, that he'd be home soon. But hours passed and he never showed up. No phone call, no message, nothing. His car was found abandoned just a mile from home. The doors were unlocked, his belongings still inside. But Ryan was nowhere to be found. His phone had been turned off, and there was no sign of struggle or foul play. It was as if Ryan had simply stepped out of his life, without leaving a trace. At first, people thought it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe he had an accident. Maybe he needed some space. But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, it became clear. This was no accident. Something was terribly wrong. And the more investigators dug into Ryan's life, the more unsettling truths began to surface. Ryan's disappearance wasn't just a random event. It was the beginning of a mystery that would grip the town and never let go. Brooksville, Ohio, a small town nestled in the heart of the American Midwest. Known for its quiet streets, its friendly neighbors, and its picture-perfect charm, it seemed like the kind of place where nothing bad could ever happen. It was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, where people took pride in their homes and their community. A place where children played in front yards, where neighbors waved to each other as they walked down the street, and where the biggest excitement might come from a local high school football game or a county fair. Brooksville was the kind of town that you could easily get lost in, but in a good way. You could be a part of the fabric of the community without drawing too much attention to yourself. And for many, that was the appeal. Life in Brooksville was peaceful, uncomplicated, and safe. But in the summer of 2018, that sense of safety would be shattered forever. What happened on one warm July evening would change Brooksville in ways no one could have ever predicted. It wasn't just a tragic event. It was the beginning of a mystery that would haunt the town for years to come. And at the center of it all was a man named Ryan Waller. Ryan Waller was, in many ways, like so many others in Brooksville. At 34 years old, he had grown up in the town, married his high school sweetheart, Sarah, and settled into a comfortable life. Ryan wasn't a man who stood out in a crowd. He wasn't a politician or a celebrity, nor was he the kind of person who would make waves. He worked as an accountant for a small firm, helping local businesses keep their books in order. It was a quiet job, but it paid the bills and allowed Ryan to support his growing family. Ryan had 2 children, both under the age of 10, and a wife who adored him. He was the kind of father who made time for his kids, even after long days at the office. He'd play catch with them in the yard, read bedtime stories, and always be there for the little moments that mattered most. He was dependable, responsible, and, by all accounts, an upstanding member of his community. He didn't have any enemies, and no one could think of a single reason why someone would want to harm him. Ryan had no known conflicts, no bad habits, and no hidden life. He was the picture of normalcy, but it was that very normalcy that made his disappearance all the more perplexing and terrifying. On the evening of July 12, 2018, Ryan Waller left his workplace around 6:30 p.m. It wasn't unusual for him to leave a bit early. His work schedule often allowed for flexibility. He had called Sarah earlier that day to let her know he was on his way home. It was a routine conversation, one they'd had countless times before. Ryan told her he was finishing up a few last-minute things at the office, but would be home soon. That evening, everything seemed fine. Sarah went about her evening, getting dinner ready for their 2 kids, chatting with neighbors outside, and looking forward to Ryan coming home. But as the hours passed, Sarah started to get worried. Ryan was late. He'd never been late without calling, and by 9 p.m., she was beginning to panic. She tried calling him several times, but each time, the phone rang and then went to voicemail. That wasn't like Ryan. He always answered, or at least sent a quick text to let her know if he was running late. But that night, nothing. By 10 p.m., Sarah knew something was terribly wrong. She called the police, reporting Ryan as a missing person. The authorities responded quickly, understanding how unusual it was for someone like Ryan to vanish without a word. Brooksville was the kind of place where people didn't just go missing. Everyone was accounted for, and everyone stuck to their routines. This was a town where people helped each other, watched out for each other, and took care of one another. The idea that someone could disappear so suddenly, without a trace, was almost incomprehensible. The police began their search right away. They checked the route Ryan would have taken home, starting with his office. But his car wasn't there. No one had seen him leave the building. It was as though he had simply vanished into thin air. Around midnight, the authorities found Ryan's car parked on a quiet road just outside of town, not far from a small wooded area. The car was unlocked, and everything appeared normal. His wallet, his phone, and his briefcase were all inside the vehicle untouched. There were no signs of a struggle. There was no broken glass or any indication of foul play. It was as though Ryan had simply stepped out of the car and walked away, leaving everything behind. This discovery only deepened the mystery. Why would Ryan leave his car and walk away, especially without telling anyone where he was going? It made no sense. His family was frantic, his co-workers were shocked, and the whole town was on edge. This wasn't just an ordinary missing person case. There were no clues, no signs of any struggle, and no idea of where Ryan might have gone or why. The police began an extensive search of the area. They combed through nearby woods, fields, and bodies of water. They interviewed neighbors and co-workers, trying to piece together Ryan's final movements. They checked the local surveillance cameras, hoping to find footage of Ryan walking somewhere, but there was nothing. No one had seen him leave the car. It was as if Ryan had simply disappeared into thin air. Days turned into weeks, and still there were no answers. The people of Brooksville, who had once felt so safe, began to feel uneasy. There was a sense of fear hanging over the town. People locked their doors at night, checked their windows, and kept a closer eye on their children. In a place like Brooksville, where crime was practically non-existent, the idea that someone could go missing without a trace was unsettling. The peaceful facade of the town was starting to crack, revealing something darker beneath the surface. Ryan's wife, Sarah, couldn't understand what had happened. She couldn't believe that her husband, a man she had known for years, a man who had no history of any kind of trouble, could just vanish. It didn't make sense. She kept thinking that maybe there had been an accident, maybe he was hurt somewhere and couldn't get to a phone. But as the days went by, those thoughts began to fade. There was no sign of an accident, no evidence that Ryan had been involved in anything that would have caused him to disappear. The more the investigation continued, the more questions arose. Had Ryan been involved in something he hadn't told anyone about? Did he owe someone money? Did he have a secret life that no one knew about? But when investigators looked into his background, they found nothing that would explain his disappearance. Ryan had no criminal record, no debts, and no signs of personal conflict. He was simply gone. As the weeks stretched into months, the case grew colder. The police kept searching, but there was no new information. The people of Brooksville grew restless. What had happened to Ryan Waller? Was he still alive? Had something terrible happened to him? Or had he left on his own? And if so, why? It was around this time that whispers began to circulate. Some residents of Brooksville began to speculate that Ryan's disappearance was tied to something darker, something that had been hidden beneath the surface of the town for years. The idea that someone in Brooksville could be responsible for Ryan's disappearance was disturbing. The town was small, everyone knew everyone, and it seemed impossible that someone could just vanish without a trace. But as time went on, the town started to feel less like the safe, tight-knit community it had once been, and more like a place where secrets were being kept. What was Brooksville hiding? Was there something darker at play? And if so, what did it have to do with Ryan Waller? As the case continued to unfold, more and more questions were raised and fewer answers were found. The investigation seemed to be at a standstill, with no new leads or clues to follow. Ryan's family, particularly Sarah, clung to hope, but with each passing day, that hope grew dimmer. The mystery of Ryan Waller's disappearance was becoming a part of Brooksville's history, a dark chapter that no one could close. And so, the town of Brooksville remained locked in a state of uncertainty. The disappearance of Ryan Waller had not only left a family broken, but it had left an entire community questioning everything they thought they knew about the people around them. The peaceful streets, the tight-knit neighbors, the safe corners of the town, none of it felt quite the same anymore. The town of Brooksville, with its quiet charm and seemingly perfect exterior, was hiding something. Something that no one was willing to talk about. Ryan Waller's disappearance wasn't just a case of a missing person. It was the beginning of a mystery that would unravel the very fabric of the community. A story that would remain unsolved for years, with no answers, no closure, and no resolution. And for Brooksville, that mystery would forever hang over the town like a shadow, one that, to this day, has never been fully lifted. Ryan Waller wasn't the type of person you'd expect to find at the center of a mystery. In fact, he was the complete opposite of someone who would make headlines or attract attention. Ryan's life, by all accounts, was ordinary, a quiet existence in the small town of Brooksville, Ohio. He didn't live extravagantly, he wasn't outspoken, and he certainly didn't go out of his way to make waves. Instead, Ryan was known for being unassuming, reliable, and dedicated to his family. At 34 years old, Ryan was a husband and a father. He had a wife, Sarah, who he'd met in high school, and together they had 2 young children. Their life wasn't one of drama or chaos. It was the kind of family life that most people in Brooksville would envy. Ryan worked as an accountant at a small firm in town, a job that suited him perfectly. He wasn't one to crave the spotlight, and accounting was a stable, predictable career. It was the kind of work that allowed him to provide for his family without fanfare. Every day, Ryan followed a routine. He'd wake up early, kiss his kids goodbye, and head to the office. He was diligent in his work, making sure everything was in order, whether it was balancing the books for local businesses or helping his colleagues with a tricky financial problem. Ryan took pride in what he did, but never to the point where it defined him. He was content to go home at the end of the day, spend time with Sarah and their kids, and enjoy the simple pleasures of family life. Ryan wasn't someone you'd expect to have enemies. In fact, most people in Brooksville would describe him as a man who got along with everyone. He was friendly without being overbearing, polite but never showy. He volunteered at the local shelter, helping with food drives and organizing events for families in need. It wasn't that he sought out praise or recognition. It was just the kind of person Ryan was. He believed in helping out, being there for others, and giving back to the community he called home. To his neighbors, Ryan was a familiar face. He would often lend a hand with yard work, help shovel snow in the winter, or just check in on older neighbors to make sure they were doing okay. He was the kind of guy who would ask if you needed anything, whether it was an extra cup of sugar or help carrying something heavy. Ryan never expected anything in return. He wasn't looking for attention or accolades. He was simply the type of person who took care of those around him without hesitation. He was a family man through and through. Ryan was devoted to his wife, Sarah, and his children. He was the kind of father who would drop everything to attend a school play, coach a soccer game, or help with homework. His kids adored him, and his love for them was evident in everything he did. Whether it was playing catch in the backyard or reading bedtime stories, Ryan was there for the small moments that matter most. Sarah often spoke about how grounded Ryan was, how he always knew what was important in life, his family, his work, and his community. Ryan was also someone who preferred a simple, low-key life. He wasn't the type to go out and seek adventure or thrill. He liked a quiet night at home, perhaps watching a movie with Sarah or tinkering with a project around the house. He wasn't interested in fancy vacations or high-end luxuries. His idea of happiness was being with his family and living a life that, while unremarkable, was filled with contentment. So when Ryan went missing on that warm July evening in 2018, it left everyone in Brooksville stunned. How could someone like him, someone who lived such a quiet, peaceful life, just vanish? There were no signs of any turmoil in his life. No unresolved conflicts. No personal issues. No reason to believe that anyone would want to harm him. Ryan wasn't a man who attracted attention, good or bad. He was the kind of person who flew under the radar, doing good without seeking recognition. So the question remained, why did Ryan Waller disappear? What could possibly have happened to him? At first, the possibility that Ryan had simply gotten into some kind of accident seemed likely. Maybe he had been hurt, maybe his car had broken down on the side of the road, or perhaps he had wandered off and gotten lost. It wasn't entirely impossible, but as the hours turned into days and then weeks, the idea of a simple accident began to feel less likely. There were no signs of Ryan anywhere. His car had been found, but no one had seen him after that. No one had heard from him. There was no sign that he had been injured or in any sort of trouble. It was as though he had simply vanished into thin air. The more the investigation continued, the more unsettling questions began to emerge. Was it possible that someone in Ryan's life knew something he didn't? Could he have been involved in something that no one knew about? Ryan's life had seemed so normal, so grounded, that the idea that he could have been hiding something, a secret life, perhaps, was almost impossible to believe. But the longer he was missing, the more that doubt crept into the minds of those searching for answers. Was there something about Ryan Waller's life that no one knew? Was it possible that he had been involved in something, even inadvertently, that had put him in harm's way? Or was his disappearance something far darker and more sinister? Did someone in the community, someone who appeared just as ordinary and harmless as Ryan, have something to do with it? There were no obvious answers. Investigators turned up nothing in Ryan's personal life to suggest that he had any reason to be targeted. He wasn't in debt, he didn't have a criminal record, and he didn't have any known enemies. But the longer the investigation dragged on, the more people began to wonder. Could there be something lurking beneath the surface, something no one had ever suspected? The case grew colder with each passing day. The police had no leads, no clues, and no explanation for Ryan's disappearance. It seemed impossible that someone so ordinary, someone who had never caused trouble, could just disappear. But sometimes that's exactly what happens. The most ordinary lives can sometimes hold the darkest secrets, and the people who seem the least likely to get caught up in danger can find themselves in the middle of something they never saw coming. As the mystery of Ryan Waller's disappearance continued to unfold, it became clear that there was more to the story than anyone had imagined. The question of why someone like Ryan would vanish wasn't just about a man's life. It was about uncovering a truth that no one in Brooksville could have anticipated. Ryan Waller wasn't a man of mystery, but in the end, his disappearance would reveal a mystery far deeper than anyone had ever expected. It was the last phone call anyone could remember, Ryan Waller's final conversation before he disappeared without a trace. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary, a routine chat with his wife, Sarah. Just a check-in, a simple exchange of words that seemed, at the time, as normal as any other. It was around 7 p.m. on July 12, 2018. Ryan had just finished up his workday at the small accounting firm where he'd been employed for years. Nothing unusual about it. Nothing that hinted at the terrible mystery that would follow. Leaving now, Ryan told Sarah. I'll be home in about an hour. The couple had planned to have a quiet evening together. Nothing fancy. The kids were already home, and dinner would soon be ready. It was a typical Thursday night. Sarah, busy with the kids, looked forward to Ryan's arrival. They'd had no issues earlier in the day. It was all ordinary, normal, and peaceful. It seemed like the end of another work week was just around the corner. But that hour came and went. And then another. Sarah, concerned, started texting him. No response. She called. It went straight to voicemail. Ryan had always been reachable. Always. He was a responsible man, a dependable husband, a dedicated father. He wasn't the type to ignore a call, especially when he was on his way home. So why was he not answering? Sarah's concern began to grow, slowly at first, but then into something much darker, a sinking feeling in her stomach. It wasn't like Ryan to be late without checking in. It wasn't like him to leave Sarah in the dark without a word. She called again and again, but still no answer. By 9 p.m., she was pacing, growing more worried by the minute. The kids were restless, asking where Dad was. She couldn't help but wonder if something had gone wrong. Around 9:30 p.m., Sarah reached out to the police. She reported Ryan as missing. The authorities didn't hesitate. They understood immediately that something wasn't right. A missing person case in Brooksville, especially one like this, was rare, almost unheard of. Ryan was not the kind of person who just disappeared. There were no warning signs, no strange behaviors, no disputes or problems. He was simply gone. The police began their search immediately. They checked Ryan's usual route home, retracing the roads he would have taken. It wasn't far, just a quick drive from the firm to their house. But when they reached the area, they found something that only deepened the mystery. Ryan's car was found parked on a quiet stretch of road about a mile from home. It was an unremarkable place, a stretch of dirt road near some wooded land, nothing out of the ordinary. The car was unlocked, and nothing seemed amiss at first glance. There were no signs of a crash. No damage to the car, no broken glass. His wallet, phone, and briefcase were all inside the car. The keys were in the ignition, but the engine was off. It looked as though Ryan had simply parked the car and stepped out. Nothing strange, no apparent reason to suspect foul play. But there was something eerie about the whole situation. The fact that his car was left there, alone and undisturbed, just a mile from home, felt off. Why had Ryan stopped there? Why had he left his car behind? It didn't make sense. The more the police examined the scene, the more questions they had, and yet there were no immediate answers. No signs of a struggle, no indication that Ryan had been in any kind of trouble. No footprints leading into the woods, no sign of any kind of altercation. It was as if Ryan had simply disappeared from that spot, with no explanation. What made it even more baffling was that no one had seen Ryan after he left the office. He wasn't caught on any surveillance cameras. No one had witnessed him walking down the road or stepping out of his car. It was as if he had just vanished into thin air. As the search for Ryan continued, it became clear that this wasn't going to be a simple case of a missing person. Ryan wasn't the kind of person who just disappeared without a reason. Something was wrong, but no one knew what it was. The police quickly began to investigate Ryan's background. They spoke to family members, friends, and coworkers. Was there any sign of trouble in Ryan's life? Did he have any enemies? Was there something in his personal life that might explain why he would suddenly vanish? They found nothing. Ryan was, by all accounts, a good man. He had no criminal record, no debts, no history of mental health issues. He wasn't involved in any shady dealings or suspicious activities. He had no known conflicts with anyone. In fact, Ryan was one of those people who seemed to get along with everyone. He was well liked in the community, a dependable neighbor, a loving husband, and a dedicated father. So why had he vanished? The police expanded their search. They scoured the area around his car, looking for any clue that might explain what happened. They brought in dogs to search the woods nearby. They checked the river and the nearby fields. They even interviewed local residents, hoping that someone had seen something, heard something, anything that could shed light on Ryan's disappearance. But all their efforts came up empty. With each passing hour, it became more and more apparent that this was no ordinary missing person case. It wasn't like Ryan had simply gotten lost or gone somewhere for a little while. There was no evidence that he had run away or left of his own accord. His life seemed stable. He was happily married, had a steady job, and a family who loved him. There were no signs of distress or unhappiness. It didn't make sense that he would simply disappear. By the time the next day arrived, the entire town of Brooksville was on edge. People couldn't stop talking about Ryan's disappearance. It was the kind of thing that didn't happen in a small town like Brooksville. People started to worry. Had something happened to Ryan? Had he been hurt? Had he met with foul play? Or was there something even more sinister at work here? Something that no one could even begin to understand? As the investigation continued, the mystery deepened. Ryan's phone, which had been turned off after he left his wife's call, remained silent. No one could reach him. His social media accounts showed no signs of activity. His work phone went unanswered. And still, no one had seen or heard from Ryan. He had just vanished. Was there a reason for his disappearance? Had something happened that no one knew about? Or was there something that people in Brooksville were hiding? Something that made Ryan's disappearance feel even more chilling? The mystery of Ryan Waller's last known moments remains one of the most baffling cases in the town's history. The phone call to his wife, the brief conversation, the promise to be home in an hour, none of it adds up. It's as if, in that hour, Ryan's life was turned upside down, and no one knows why. As the weeks went by and the search efforts continued, the people of Brooksville couldn't help but wonder if they would ever get answers. Why had Ryan left his car and walked away? Where had he gone? What had happened to him in those final moments before he disappeared? Each new lead seemed to lead to more questions, but no answers. The questions only piled up. Was this an accident? Did something happen to him on the way home? Or was there something more sinister at play? Something hidden beneath the surface of this small, seemingly peaceful town? The last known moments of Ryan Waller's life remain a mystery to this day. The phone call with Sarah. The car left abandoned on a quiet road. The unanswered questions. Each piece of the puzzle only seems to add to the enigma of his disappearance. The disappearance of Ryan Waller sent shockwaves through the small town of Brooksville, Ohio. What began as a mystery quickly became a full-scale investigation. But as the days passed and the search for answers continued, the case grew colder with each passing moment. The police wasted no time. They initiated an exhaustive search for Ryan, scouring every possible location where he might have gone. They focused first on the area around Ryan's abandoned car. The woods, fields, and even the nearby river were thoroughly combed for any sign of his whereabouts. They brought in tracking dogs to follow any potential scent, hoping they could trace his movements, but with little success. The dogs found nothing, no footprints, no signs that Ryan had wandered off or been dragged away. The ground remained eerily undisturbed, leaving investigators to wonder if he had simply vanished into thin air. Local ponds, creeks, and even storm drains were checked, but there was no trace of Ryan. It was as if he had disappeared without a trace. No one could explain it, and as the search efforts stretched into days, then weeks, the frustration among the investigators grew. In the meantime, the police turned to the people who knew Ryan best. His friends, co-workers, and family members were all questioned. They spoke of Ryan as a reliable, steady man with no enemies. No one could think of any reason why he would have gone missing on his own, or why anyone would want to hurt him. Ryan had no criminal background, no secret debts, no love triangles, no hidden affairs. His life was as quiet and unremarkable as the small town he lived in. Investigators dug deeper into Ryan's past. They examined his financial records, hoping to find some clue, perhaps an unreported debt or a financial problem that had pushed him to leave. But once again, they found nothing. Ryan had no outstanding debts, no financial issues, and no signs of distress. His life, it seemed, was perfectly ordinary. There were no skeletons in his closet. No reason why he would have disappeared voluntarily. But despite these interviews and background checks, the investigation led nowhere. The police also reviewed his phone records, searching for any clues that might explain his disappearance. They discovered that Ryan's phone had gone silent shortly after that last call to his wife. He hadn't made any calls, sent any messages, or accessed social media after 7 p.m. that evening. The lack of activity on his phone made it even more baffling. If he had simply gone for a walk or had been in some kind of accident, surely he would have tried to reach someone. But there was nothing. It was as if Ryan had simply disappeared, cutting all contact with the outside world. The search for physical evidence continued, but the police were coming up empty-handed. They combed through the wooded areas around his car, hoping to find something, anything, that could lead them to Ryan. They even brought in volunteers from the community to help scour the area. But each search ended with no new information. No clues. No signs that Ryan had been there at all. As the weeks passed, the search expanded, and the investigation grew more desperate. The police canvassed the town, asking everyone for information. They spoke to neighbors, friends, and even people who had seen Ryan that day. But no one had seen anything unusual. No one could offer any useful information. It was as if Ryan had simply stepped off the face of the earth. One of the more frustrating aspects of the investigation was the lack of surveillance footage. In a town like Brooksville, where everyone knew each other and most businesses had security cameras, the police expected that they might find something. Some grainy footage of Ryan walking down the street, or of someone in his life leaving his workplace. But there was nothing. No footage showing Ryan leaving his office, no footage showing him on the road, and no footage showing anyone interacting with him in the hours before his disappearance. It was as though the cameras had been turned off when he needed them most. Investigators also considered the possibility of foul play. But once again, there were no signs of a break-in at his house, no ransom demands, and no evidence of any violent struggle. Ryan's family and friends were adamant that he had no enemies. No one had ever threatened him. No one had any reason to harm him. The lack of physical evidence made it hard to point in any particular direction. No one knew what had happened to Ryan, and the more they looked, the less they found. The police didn't give up, though. They continued to follow up on every lead, even the smallest ones. They looked into Ryan's workplace, wondering if something at the office could have played a role in his disappearance. Could someone at work have been involved? Could there have been some hidden issue that no one knew about? But once again, the investigation turned up nothing. Ryan's co-workers spoke highly of him, and there was no indication of any conflicts or problems at the office. In the meantime, the town of Brooksville began to change. A sense of unease settled over the community. People couldn't stop talking about Ryan's disappearance. They began to wonder if someone in town knew more than they were letting on. There was a general feeling that someone had to know something. The question lingered in the air. Was there something the community was hiding? Were there people in Brooksville who were withholding information? The town felt like it was holding its breath, as if waiting for someone to speak up. Despite the growing anxiety, the investigation continued to stall. There were no new leads and no new evidence. With each passing day, the case grew colder. As weeks turned into months, the police had little more than the same unanswered questions. Where was Ryan Waller? What had happened to him? Why had he disappeared? With time, the town began to accept that they might never get the answers they were hoping for. The search for Ryan, once a full-blown effort, began to lose steam. Resources were diverted to other cases, and attention began to fade. But the mystery of Ryan's disappearance remained, unanswered and unresolved. For Ryan's family, the pain of not knowing what happened to him was unbearable. Sarah, his wife, held on to the hope that somehow, someway, they would find out what had happened to her husband. She clung to the belief that answers were out there somewhere, but with each passing day, that hope began to fade. The truth, it seemed, was slipping further and further away. The investigation into Ryan Waller's disappearance was a trail that went cold, one that offered no answers, no closure, and no resolution. It was as if Ryan had vanished from the world, leaving behind only questions and a haunting sense of mystery that no one could solve. As the investigation into Ryan Waller's disappearance stalled, theories began to swirl. With no concrete evidence to point to a single explanation, people started asking themselves, what happened to Ryan? Could Ryan have walked away from his life? Some wondered if he had staged his own disappearance. It wasn't an unusual thought in cases like these. People sometimes choose to leave everything behind, family, friends, and the life they've known, for reasons that are often buried deep inside them. It's a theory that's always difficult to prove, but it wasn't impossible. Some believed that Ryan might have just gotten tired of his life in Brooksville. The quiet, small-town existence he led, working as an accountant, helping at the local shelter, raising his kids, maybe it wasn't enough anymore. Maybe he wanted something different, something unknown, but there was no evidence of this. Ryan had no known history of running away or abandoning his responsibilities. He hadn't been acting strangely in the days leading up to his disappearance. His finances were in order. There were no signs of financial irregularities, no signs that Ryan had been planning to leave. He hadn't made any significant purchases, hadn't taken out large sums of money, and hadn't made any arrangements to disappear. In fact, he was in the middle of everyday life, his work, his family, his commitments. There were no sudden decisions, no unexplained actions, and no signs of any deep dissatisfaction that would suggest he was thinking about walking away from everything. So, the theory of Ryan staging his own disappearance didn't seem likely. But as weeks turned into months and the search for him continued without any answers, other, darker possibilities began to emerge. What if Ryan's disappearance wasn't voluntary? What if something sinister had happened? Some started speculating that Ryan had become involved in something darker, something dangerous, something that no one in the quiet town of Brooksville had any idea about. Could he have been caught up in something that went beyond his simple day-to-day life? Was there a hidden side to Brooksville that no one knew about? A side of the town that Ryan had gotten tangled up in? This theory seemed more plausible as people began to ask questions that weren't as easily answered. Brooksville was, after all, a small town. People thought they knew everything about everyone, but sometimes, even in the smallest communities, secrets could be hidden in plain sight. Had Ryan stumbled upon something he wasn't supposed to? Had he gotten mixed up in something that he couldn't get out of? Was there a dark underbelly of the town, a secret world of crime or corruption, that no one was aware of? Maybe Ryan had learned something that someone didn't want him to know, and that's why he disappeared. One of the first things people speculated about was whether Ryan had been involved with someone or something on the side. He had seemed like the perfect husband and father. He was always there for his family, always working, always doing the right thing. But in small towns, things are rarely as perfect as they seem on the surface. People started to question whether Ryan might have been living a double life, whether he had been hiding something from his wife, his friends, or even the whole town. Could he have been involved in something criminal? Perhaps there was a shady side to Ryan that no one knew about. Maybe he had become involved in something illegal, like drug trafficking or money laundering, and that's why he disappeared. It was a theory that seemed to hold some weight. After all, Ryan had worked in finance, and while there was no immediate evidence of financial crime, it was possible that he could have gotten caught up in something dangerous without anyone suspecting. Maybe he had made a bad decision, become involved in something he couldn't escape from, and had been forced to go into hiding to avoid the consequences. But there was no evidence to support this either. Ryan's financial records had been thoroughly examined, and nothing out of the ordinary had been found. He wasn't in debt, wasn't involved in any suspicious transactions, and hadn't been living beyond his means. There was nothing that pointed to any involvement in criminal activity. Ryan seemed to be living a straightforward, conventional life, one that didn't hint at any darker secrets. Still, people kept asking, was there something Ryan knew that others didn't? Some speculated that Ryan's disappearance was related to a larger, more mysterious event that was happening in the town. Could there have been a hidden world of crime or corruption operating right under everyone's noses, and Ryan had unknowingly walked into it? At the same time, Some people began to focus on the possibility that Ryan had been targeted by someone. Was there someone who wanted to silence him? Someone who had a reason to make Ryan disappear? If Ryan had accidentally stumbled into something that he wasn't supposed to, could someone have been trying to keep him quiet? Theories of this sort seem to lean on the idea that someone in Brooksville was involved in criminal activity. Something serious, something that could have led to Ryan's disappearance. But who? Who in Brooksville could have done something like this? People racked their brains trying to think of anyone who might have wanted to hurt Ryan, but nothing came to mind. Could the disappearance have been connected to something in Ryan's past? Perhaps there was someone from his past who had a grudge against him, someone he had crossed paths with years ago, someone who now had a reason to get rid of him. Maybe it was an old enemy or someone who held a deep resentment. But once again, no evidence pointed to anyone in Ryan's life having any reason to harm him. Then there was the possibility that Ryan's disappearance wasn't about him at all, that it was the result of a random, violent act. Perhaps Ryan had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Could he have been abducted by a stranger, someone who had no connection to him but saw an opportunity and acted on it? It wasn't an implausible theory, but it was one that lacked any solid evidence. There was no sign of forced entry at Ryan's home, no ransom demands, no indication that he had been targeted by anyone specifically. It seemed unlikely that such an event would happen in a small town like Brooksville, where everyone knew everyone else. But the more time that passed without any leads, the more people started to entertain the darker theories. Was there something about Ryan's disappearance that no one was seeing? Had he uncovered something in Brooksville that no one wanted to be known? Had he been involved in something deeper than anyone realized? Something so dark that even those closest to him hadn't known? Was it possible that Ryan's life had been much more complicated than anyone had imagined? Was there a secret he was hiding? A secret that could explain his sudden disappearance? Could Ryan have been involved in something far outside of the life people knew him for? A life no one suspected? As the weeks turned into months, the theories continued to evolve. The possibility that Ryan had been involved in something dark, something that led to his disappearance, was something that no one could entirely dismiss. It remained one of the most chilling possibilities in the case. After all, when there are no answers, the imagination begins to run wild. People begin to consider every possibility, no matter how dark, no matter how unlikely. And so, the town of Brooksville continued to wrestle with the mystery of Ryan Waller's disappearance. Every theory seemed plausible, and yet none of them could fully explain what had happened to him. The truth, it seemed, was buried deep, hidden behind a web of secrets, lies, and unknowns that no one could unravel. Could there have been a hidden side to Ryan Waller? A side of him that no one knew? A side of Brooksville that no one suspected? Or was there simply no explanation at all? 2 months had passed since Ryan Waller's disappearance, and with each day, the case grew colder. The search efforts had become less intense, and the once hopeful townspeople were now beginning to accept the possibility that they might never find out what had happened to Ryan. It seemed as if the mystery was destined to remain unsolved. But then, in what felt like an instant, everything changed. A breakthrough came when no one expected it. It happened in the most ordinary of ways. An average hiker, out for a walk in the woods, stumbled upon something that would shift the entire course of the investigation. On a crisp fall morning, a local hiker was trekking through the thick forests near an old, abandoned cabin deep in the woods. It wasn't the kind of place most people ventured to, but the hiker had been in the area before. The woods, dense with trees and covered in underbrush, were quiet and still, offering a sense of isolation and serenity. It was the kind of place that felt untouched by time, a forgotten corner of Brooksville's landscape. But that day, the hiker's walk would lead them to a discovery that no one could have predicted. As they made their way through the woods, their eyes were drawn to something out of place on the forest floor. Among the fallen leaves, twigs, and debris, there was a small object, a wallet. At first glance, it seemed like just another piece of discarded trash. But as the hiker bent down and picked it up, they immediately recognized it as something more significant. This wasn't just any wallet. This was Ryan Waller's wallet. The hiker's heart raced as they realized the weight of what they had just found. They knew the story. They knew Ryan had disappeared 2 months earlier. They knew that his car had been found abandoned, his phone turned off, and no one had heard from him since that evening in July. But here, in the middle of the woods, was his wallet. It was a chilling discovery. The hiker immediately contacted the authorities, and the police arrived shortly thereafter to examine the find. The wallet appeared to be in good condition. It wasn't damaged, it wasn't torn, and it didn't seem like it had been exposed to the elements for an extended period. There was no sign of water damage, no stains, and nowhere that you might expect from an item left outside for 2 months. It was as if it had been dropped there recently, or perhaps placed there intentionally. Inside the wallet were the usual items: Ryan's ID, a few credit cards, and some cash. Nothing appeared to be missing or out of place. But what caught the attention of investigators was the way the wallet was found. It wasn't discarded carelessly, nor was it lying in a spot where someone might have absent-mindedly dropped it. It was placed in the woods with intention. The wallet seemed untouched, pristine, but there was something unsettling about the discovery. It felt like a clue, like Ryan had left it behind for a reason. But why would he have been in the woods in the first place? And why would he have left his wallet behind? The discovery of Ryan's wallet near the abandoned cabin immediately raised more questions than answers. Investigators were left wondering, why would Ryan's wallet be here? What was he doing in this remote area of the woods? The location was far from his home, and the woods weren't a place he would have typically visited. It wasn't part of his usual routine, and yet here it was tucked away in the forest, far from civilization. No one knew why Ryan would have been there, and no one knew why he would have left his wallet behind. The abandoned cabin, too, raised questions. It wasn't a place that Ryan had ever been known to frequent. In fact, very few people in the town even knew of its existence. It had been unoccupied for years, its windows boarded up, its door hanging off its hinges. The cabin stood in a quiet part of the forest, isolated from the main road, and rarely visited. Why would Ryan have gone there? Was there something about this place that drew him in? It was an unsettling thought. Had Ryan been trying to escape? Had he been running from something, or someone? Was the wallet left behind an attempt to signal someone, a message in a way, to show that he had been there? Some theorized that perhaps Ryan had been in a rush, trying to get away from something, and had dropped his wallet while fleeing. Others suggested that the wallet had been intentionally placed in the woods, maybe as part of some plan or as a way of leaving behind something, some kind of clue that only someone who knew him would recognize. As the investigation deepened, the authorities began to focus on the woods and the cabin. Could Ryan have been trying to hide something? Had he been involved in something dangerous? Or perhaps he had encountered someone in the woods, someone who had led him to this secluded place, and there had been some sort of struggle or confrontation. But the more investigators searched, the more they found that the cabin itself offered no clear answers. There were no signs of a struggle inside the cabin. It was empty, save for a few discarded items that appeared to have been left behind years ago. No recent footprints, no broken windows, no indications that anyone had entered or exited the cabin recently. The area surrounding the cabin seemed untouched, and the woods around it were quiet, save for the rustling of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. The place had the eerie feeling of abandonment, of something left behind and forgotten. Investigators spent hours combing the area surrounding the cabin, looking for any clues that might explain why Ryan's wallet had ended up there. They searched the woods for signs of a struggle, looking for blood, broken branches, or anything unusual. But again, they came up empty-handed. The woods were vast and dense, and it was hard to pinpoint any one location where something significant could have happened. Still, the discovery of the wallet felt important. It was a lead that could not be ignored. It was the first real clue in weeks, and it seemed to point in a direction that no one had previously considered. The wallet wasn't just a piece of personal property. It was a symbol, a message. Ryan had been there. He had been in the woods, close to the abandoned cabin. But what had happened to him? Theories started to emerge, some suggesting that Ryan had been lured to the cabin, that someone had set up a meeting there, and that something had gone terribly wrong. Others wondered if Ryan had gone there on his own, perhaps seeking solitude, or maybe to confront something from his past that had caught up with him. The lack of evidence in the cabin and the surrounding woods only added to the mystery. Was this where Ryan had disappeared? Had he been taken somewhere else? Or had he simply vanished on his own, leaving behind the wallet as a clue? As the investigation into the wallet continued, the authorities expanded their search, focusing on the area around the cabin and questioning local residents who lived near the woods. They asked if anyone had seen anything unusual, anyone coming or going, any vehicles parked nearby, or any strange behavior in the days leading up to Ryan's disappearance. But once again, they came up with no answers. No one had seen anything unusual. No one had heard anything. The area seemed to hold its secrets tightly. Despite the lack of answers, the discovery of Ryan's wallet marked a turning point in the investigation. It was a breakthrough, a sign that the mystery was far from over. But what did it mean? Where was Ryan? And why had his wallet been left in the woods near the abandoned cabin? For now, those questions remained unanswered. But the case had taken a dark turn, and the search for Ryan Waller was far from finished. The discovery of Ryan Waller's wallet deep in the woods, near an old abandoned cabin, was a breakthrough, no doubt about it. But what happened next would turn this case into something far darker than anyone had expected. The more investigators dug into the history of the cabin, the more unsettling things became. It wasn't just an old, forgotten house at the edge of town. It had a history that was tied to criminal activity, mysterious disappearances, and a reputation that no one had ever fully understood. Could Ryan have been unknowingly mixed up in something much larger than anyone could have imagined? Could his disappearance have been connected to something far darker, involving people in the shadows? As the authorities began to investigate the area around the cabin more thoroughly, they discovered something chilling. The cabin wasn't just some random, abandoned building. It was tied to a string of unsolved burglaries that had taken place in Brooksville over the past few years. For a small town like Brooksville, burglaries were rare, and when they did happen, they were usually solved quickly. But these burglaries were different. They weren't random acts of theft. The homes that were targeted weren't just broken into, they were carefully planned hits, where nothing of obvious value was stolen. Instead, it was as if the burglars were looking for something specific, something that couldn't be easily identified. Some of the houses that had been broken into were owned by people who had no known connection to each other. They didn't live in the same neighborhood or have similar lifestyles. They weren't wealthy or involved in any known criminal activity. Yet, their homes had been targeted with precision. Some of the homes had been broken into when the owners were out of town. In other cases, the thieves had entered through unlocked doors or windows when the residents were asleep, taking only small, seemingly insignificant items. Old documents, personal papers, items with no obvious value. The burglaries never resulted in anything major being stolen, but the oddity of the break-ins left a lingering sense of unease in the town. At first, investigators thought these burglaries might be unrelated, random acts of petty crime with no larger motive. But as the years went by, the pattern became undeniable. The burglaries seemed to be connected. Someone or a group of people was targeting specific houses, but why? And what were they looking for? It wasn't until after Ryan's wallet was discovered near the cabin that authorities began to dig deeper into the possibility that Ryan had somehow become involved in this dark web of criminal activity. What if the cabin, once thought of as just a forgotten relic of Brooksville's past, had been the center of something much bigger? What if Ryan had unknowingly walked into the middle of something dangerous? The cabin had stood empty for years, but it wasn't always abandoned. In fact, it had once been the home of a man named Earl Donovan, a local resident who had been known for his shady dealings in town. Donovan had run a small, unassuming antique shop in Brooksville, but it was widely known that his business wasn't just about selling old furniture and trinkets. There had been rumors for years about what went on in the back rooms of his shop, whispers of illegal trade, shady exchanges, and meetings with unsavory characters. But no one ever had enough evidence to tie Donovan to any major criminal activity. He was good at staying under the radar, good at keeping his secrets hidden. Donovan had eventually left Brooksville under mysterious circumstances, and the cabin had sat vacant ever since. No one knew exactly why he left, but there were rumors that he had run afoul of someone in the criminal underworld and had been forced to flee. Some people said that Donovan had gotten too involved in things that weren't meant to be exposed, things like stolen goods, smuggling, or even more dangerous operations. But no one had concrete proof. The town had just accepted that Donovan was gone, and the cabin was left to rot. However, once the investigation into Ryan's disappearance shifted toward the cabin, things started to connect. It turned out that Earl Donovan wasn't the only person with ties to the cabin. Over the years, a few other individuals, people with criminal backgrounds, had been seen hanging around the area. There were rumors that the cabin had been used as a place to hide stolen items, conduct illicit meetings, or even launder money. But all of this was hearsay. Nothing substantial had ever been found to link the cabin to any actual crimes. That is, until Ryan Waller's wallet was discovered. Suddenly, the cabin wasn't just an abandoned building. It was a possible hotspot for something much more sinister. What if Ryan had somehow gotten mixed up in this world, a world full of secrecy and hidden transactions? What if he had been in the wrong place at the wrong time? Investigators began to re-examine the unsolved burglaries, and as they dug deeper, they found that Ryan had, in fact, been linked to a few of them, not as a perpetrator, but as a potential witness. It turned out that Ryan had visited some of the homes that had been burglarized, either as part of his accounting work or in passing. His connection to the victims seemed incidental at first, but the more the authorities looked into it, the more it became apparent that Ryan might have seen something he wasn't supposed to see. One of the most unsettling theories that emerged was the possibility that Ryan had stumbled upon a criminal operation, something that was much bigger than anyone realized. Maybe he had unknowingly uncovered something dangerous. Perhaps he had seen the wrong person at the wrong time, or overheard something that put him in the crosshairs of a criminal group. The theory was that Ryan's disappearance wasn't an accident. It was a targeted move, orchestrated by people who had a lot to lose if their operations were exposed. There were whispers that the people involved in the local crimes had connections to larger networks operating outside of Brooksville, networks that were involved in serious, organized crime. The nature of the burglaries, carefully planned, precise, and seemingly without rhyme or reason, suggested that there was something more going on behind the scenes. The stolen items, the secretive nature of the break-ins, the suspicious characters seen near the cabin, all pointed to the possibility that Brooksville wasn't the peaceful, quiet town it seemed to be on the surface. As investigators began to look into the people who had been in and around the cabin in the years leading up to Ryan's disappearance, they found a handful of individuals who had connections to the criminal world. They weren't residents of Brooksville, but they had visited the town on occasion. Some of them had ties to known gangs or underground operations, and their involvement in the town's criminal activities went unnoticed until now. Were these individuals responsible for Ryan's disappearance? Had they silenced him because he had become too curious or had seen something he shouldn't have? The more the investigation unfolded, the clearer it became that Ryan's disappearance wasn't just about one man. It was part of a larger puzzle, a puzzle that involved a town with a dark secret and people who would stop at nothing to protect their hidden operations. The cabin, once thought of as a relic of the past, now stood as a symbol of the sinister forces at play. Ryan Waller had unknowingly walked into a situation that was much darker than anyone had realized, and now, it seemed, someone was going to great lengths to make sure that the truth remained buried. Could Ryan have known more than he ever let on? Could his disappearance be part of something larger, something connected to organized crime and criminal networks operating just beneath the surface of Brooksville? The chilling reality was that, as the investigation progressed, the town's dark secrets were beginning to spill into the light. And the more they uncovered, the more the true nature of Ryan's disappearance became clear. It wasn't just about a missing man. It was about a town filled with shadows, secrets, and a criminal underworld that no one had expected. Ryan Waller's case remains one of the most baffling and unsettling mysteries in the small town of Brooksville, Ohio. It's a case that has haunted everyone involved, from his family to the police to the community at large. Ryan, a man who had always been known for his quiet, unassuming life, simply vanished without a trace. His disappearance didn't just leave a hole in his family's heart, it left a void in the town itself. And to this day, no one has been able to answer the one question that lingers, haunting everyone who knew him. Where is Ryan Waller? It's been years since Ryan went missing, but for his wife, Sarah, the pain hasn't faded. Every day, she wakes up hoping that today will be the day she gets the news that her husband has been found. She still holds on to the hope that somewhere out there, Ryan is alive and that one day he'll return. But as the years stretch on, and as each passing day brings more silence, Sarah is forced to confront the grim reality that the world she once knew may never be the same again. Sarah's life has been consumed by the search for answers. She's spent countless hours sifting through old files, talking to investigators, and retracing every step that Ryan took in the days leading up to his disappearance. She's revisited every place he visited, trying to uncover any detail that might have been overlooked. And despite all the dead ends, despite all the frustration, she continues. Because to her, not knowing what happened to Ryan is the hardest thing to bear. The uncertainty gnaws at her, and yet she can't give up. She needs to know the truth, even if it's a truth she doesn't want to hear. But for Sarah, the most haunting part is the silence. There are no leads, no breakthroughs. The case has gone cold. There are no fresh clues to guide the investigation, and there's no sign of Ryan, no evidence that suggests where he might have gone or what might have happened to him. The phone calls stop, the search efforts fade, and the world moves on. But for Sarah, it's like time has stood still. Every moment without an answer is a moment she can't let go of. The town of Brooksville, Once a place where everyone knew each other and life moved at a slow, peaceful pace, is now left in a state of quiet unease. The disappearance of Ryan Waller was a shock, but the uncertainty that followed has changed the way people look at their community. Brooksville, for all its charm and warmth, now feels like a place with a shadow hanging over it. The same streets, the same familiar faces, but beneath it all, there's a lingering question. Where is Ryan? People in town still talk about Ryan. His disappearance is the kind of thing that doesn't go away easily, especially in a place like Brooksville, where everyone is connected. Neighbors remember him as a kind man, always helping, always willing to lend a hand. His co-workers describe him as a dedicated accountant, someone who didn't draw attention to himself, but who quietly worked hard and kept to himself. He didn't have any enemies. He wasn't involved in any risky behavior. There was no reason for him to suddenly vanish. That's what makes it so difficult for those who knew him. There's no explanation. No one can understand why someone like Ryan would simply disappear without a trace. The authorities have tried to piece together the details. Investigators have retraced his steps, interviewed anyone who might have seen something unusual, and followed every lead they could find. But as the years have passed, the evidence has remained thin. There's nothing substantial to explain where Ryan went or why he vanished. His car was found abandoned just a mile from home, but it didn't show any signs of a struggle or foul play. His phone was turned off, and there's no indication of who might have been the last person he spoke to, beyond the brief conversation with his wife. There was no ransom note, no sign that anyone was trying to extort money from his family. No footprints, no witnesses, no surveillance footage. Just a man leaving his job for the night, and then nothing. The search efforts, once full of energy and hope, slowly faded. Volunteers stopped coming to help search the woods and surrounding areas. The police investigation turned into something more like a cold case. They followed up on every lead, but every door they opened led to another dead end. As the months turned into years, the case began to fade from the public eye. The signs of Ryan Waller disappeared from the news, and the posters with his face slowly faded from the windows of local businesses. People moved on. The world moved on. But Sarah couldn't. There's a nagging question that continues to hang in the air. Could Ryan have walked away from his life? Some have suggested that maybe he just decided to leave, to start over somewhere else. But those who knew Ryan best don't believe this to be true. There was no sign that he was unhappy. He didn't show any signs of distress. His finances were stable. He had a loving wife and a family that depended on him. Why would he suddenly walk away without a word? And if he did, why leave his wallet behind? Why leave everything he knew, everything he had built, and simply vanish? Others have speculated that maybe something darker was at play. Could Ryan have gotten caught up in something he didn't understand? Was he involved in something illegal, something dangerous, that led to his disappearance? Could he have been targeted by someone with ill intent? As the investigation into his disappearance unfolded, rumors began to swirl about possible connections to local crime, burglary rings, shady figures who had been in and around Brooksville. But these were just theories, and none of them were ever proven. The police had no concrete evidence to suggest that Ryan was involved in anything criminal. The idea that Ryan had been caught up in something sinister remains one of the most unsettling possibilities. But it doesn't bring any closer to an answer. And then there's the theory that maybe Ryan met with foul play. Perhaps someone in Brooksville knew something, but no one was talking. It's the kind of small-town mystery that people are quick to try to ignore, but slowly, whispers begin to emerge. The truth might be out there, hidden behind closed doors, behind conversations that no one dares to have. If someone knew something, why wouldn't they come forward? Why hasn't there been a break in the case? Why does the town seem to hold its breath, waiting for something, anything, that might provide a clue about Ryan's whereabouts? One of the most heartbreaking things about this case is that, as the years pass, it becomes harder and harder to hold on to the hope that Ryan is still out there. As each day goes by without an answer, it starts to feel like the reality is sinking in, that Ryan may never be found. But Sarah continues, as does the hope that maybe, just maybe, there is still a chance. She won't give up. She can't. The silence is unbearable, and the not knowing is worse than anything. Brooksville waits. The town waits for the truth to surface, for the mystery to be solved. Everyone hopes that one day, someone will step forward with the information that will bring closure to Ryan's family and to the community that has been forever changed by his disappearance. But as of now, all anyone can do is ask the same question over and over again. Where is Ryan Waller? We've followed Ryan Waller's case from the moment he disappeared to the years of unanswered questions that still linger. We've explored the chilling moments of his last known whereabouts, the unsettling discoveries along the way, and the various theories that have surfaced over time. Yet, after everything we've discussed, there's one question that still remains. What really happened to Ryan Waller? As we've seen, the case has more than its fair share of twists and turns. Was it something Ryan was involved in, something he couldn't escape? Was there an unknown danger lurking beneath the surface of his quiet, unassuming life? Or is it something even darker, a truth that hasn't come to light because it's hidden too well, too deeply? There's no shortage of possibilities, but with every theory we examine, we seem to find ourselves right back where we started, still searching for answers, still wondering what happened that night in July. But this is where you come in. You, the viewer, have your own perspective. Maybe you've been following this case for some time, or maybe this is the first you're hearing about it. Either way, your thoughts matter. After all, it's possible that a fresh pair of eyes, a new perspective, could bring something to light that's been overlooked. Maybe you have an idea that no one else has considered. Maybe there's something about the case that caught your attention, something that didn't quite add up for you. So, I want to know, what do you think happened to Ryan Waller? Do you think he walked away from his life voluntarily? Some people believe that maybe, for reasons we don't understand, Ryan simply decided to disappear. Maybe he wanted to start fresh somewhere else, leave everything behind. But when you consider all the details of his life, the stability, the relationships, the lack of any indication that he was unhappy, this seems unlikely. Could it still be possible? Or do you think there's more to the story? Could there have been someone else involved? Perhaps you believe that Ryan got caught up in something he wasn't prepared for. Maybe there's a side to Brooksville, a dark undercurrent of activity that no one knew about. Could Ryan have stumbled onto something dangerous, something criminal, and paid the price for it? We know the cabin found near where his wallet was discovered has a history, a connection to past crimes. Could Ryan have unknowingly walked into something that ultimately led to his disappearance? Or maybe you think there's another theory entirely. Maybe Ryan's disappearance wasn't about him at all, but about someone else in his life. Could he have been targeted? Could someone have wanted him gone for reasons that no one saw coming? There's a chilling possibility that the people around him knew something, that someone close to him might have been involved, but for reasons we can't explain has stayed silent. Every theory brings with it its own set of questions. Was there a hidden side to Ryan's life that we never knew about? Could there have been something in his past that led to his disappearance? Or was he simply in the wrong place at the wrong time? The more you think about it, the more this case pulls you in. It's easy to see how people can get caught up in trying to solve a mystery like this one, where the answers are just out of reach, and the silence grows louder with each passing day. So let's turn the focus to you. You've seen the evidence, you've heard the theories, and now it's time to make up your mind. What do you think happened to Ryan Waller? Do you believe the truth is out there waiting to be discovered, or is this a mystery that will remain unsolved forever? There's no right or wrong answer, just your perspective, your thoughts on a case that continues to puzzle us all. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Share your theories, your suspicions, and any clues you think might have been missed. Maybe something you've noticed will spark a conversation, or maybe your comment will lead someone else to think in a way they haven't before. The more we talk about it, the closer we come to the truth. If not for Ryan, then at least for his family, who still hold on to the hope that one day, the mystery will be solved. They deserve closure. They deserve the truth. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe for more unsolved mysteries that will keep you questioning the world around you. We cover cases just like this. Stories that leave us wondering, stories that leave us unsettled, stories that keep us coming back to find the answers that are hiding just out of reach. If you're someone who loves a good mystery, or if you simply want to help uncover the truth, this is the place for you. By subscribing, you'll stay up to date on the latest videos, and together, we can continue exploring the dark corners of these unsolved cases. Ryan Waller's case is far from the only one with unanswered questions, and your perspective is important as we work to piece together the details. Every theory counts, every conversation matters, and together, maybe we'll uncover the truth behind the mystery. But for now, we still have one lingering question. Where is Ryan Waller? The search continues, the mystery lingers, and the silence remains. And until the answers come, we'll keep asking, hoping, waiting, searching. So again, what do you think happened to Ryan Waller? Let us know in the comments, and thank you for watching. Until next time, keep questioning, keep searching, and never stop wondering.